All right. Joining us today is Mr. Danny B. Harvey. How are you doing, my friend?
Pretty good. How you doing, Sam? So it's
I'm
fun to
doing
be on
good.
here.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for doing it. I'm looking forward to it. So, what have you been up to since, let's say, mid-March, when everything was going along as normal, and then all of a sudden it wasn't? Were you
Actually,
what were you kind of planning on for the spring, and then what have you been up to kind of change since you had been forced to
well, I
change?
had a lot of I know I had a lot of albums scheduled to come out this year, and I've
Mhm.
actually done a couple more since then. And the thing I did have a lot of shows, but they had a lot of festivals that got canceled. When I say a lot, I mean less than 10, but pretty much just festivals. Looking forward to a couple of those a month was always
Yeah.
fun.
Yeah.
So I haven't done it. So obviously all the festivals got canceled, but but going back to March, we had, I produced the Robert Gordon's new album, which had a lot of really
Mm.
cool special guests. That came out on Cleopatra. And then my Head Cat 13 album came out, which I'd done last year with the bass player from Hawkwind. That came out. And then just last week, my band 69 Cats, our first single was released. And we'd started recording that over the singer's Yerky 69 from 69 Eyes. The drummer is Rat Scabies from The Damned. And the bass player is Kim Necroman from the Necromantics. So
Yeah, I just
we'd
watched that
actually
video. It sounds great.
we did, and we did the
Congratulations on
video
it. Yeah.
in quarantine because I put up a black sheet in my room, filmed myself. Everyone did that, and then the director was able to put us all together. Even though it's obvious to tell we're not in the same shot, it kind of it still looks kind of cool that they did that. And Rat
It
filmed
works.
himself in
It
the
works.
studio.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I would have never thought that unless you told me. So you guys pulled it off.
yeah. So yeah, I just said there's been a lot of I produced a single for Dale Watson. He did a
Mhm.
cover of Chevy Van, so I did that complete. That didn't even come up until like April or May, and he's in Memphis, so I was able to do the music here. He did the vocals in Memphis. I was able to mix it here. Yes, I've been doing a lot of session stuff and still putting records out. And now I'm finally starting to play live again, but it's limited. The audience is smaller. It's fun to be on stage though.
Yeah, you had mentioned that in our messages that you're kind of back at it pretty strong. So yeah, how's it going? I mean, you kind of just said it, but it just feels good to play, I assume. But what's the crowd difference? Is it 50%,
Well,
20%?
they're doing 50% now. In some clubs that'd be a problem. But now that Sagebrush opened during the pandemic, they were always scheduled to open April 1st, and then they got to open in June, and they closed down like 3 weeks later when everything got shut down again. Then they reopened, I guess, back in August, and maybe beginning of September they reopened. But they're doing really well. But the place has, because of the large backyard, it has a capacity of like 800 or 600. So
Beautiful.
they get a lot of people there, and they're really good at following safety concerns, like the bar staff and all the staff and the bartenders. They all wear masks at all times. When you stand in line, if you try to go up to the bar without a mask on or your mask pulled down, they're like, especially a couple of bartenders they're feisty. They'll yell at you,
Good.
get your mask up or get out of here. Like, and so that's it. So you kind of like,
Good.
then you go sit out back. All the tables are 6 feet apart. Now back, obviously, open air. So when you sit down with your group of people, you have the option to take your mask off. But when you get up to use the restroom or go to the bar or go to the food trucks, they expect you to put your mask on, or they'll tell you if you don't. So
And I've only played since March. I've only played one private gig, so I've pretty much kind of at the behest of my wife taking it, and I'm fine with it too because I like to play it safe and everything. But I've only played one private gig, and one thing somebody told me going into it, and then I kind of felt, and I'm wondering if you felt the same way. Feels great on stage, feels great to play. Obviously, it's amazing. And then when you stop playing, it gets a little. I don't know if you feel this way. It gets a little like that's when it starts getting awkward because you're used to being friendly, talking to people, maybe selling merch or
yeah,
just, and now it's like, well, hold on, man, stand back a little bit. Are you
yeah.
kind of feeling that or not so much?
Yeah, why don't nowadays I don't even bother selling merch for these gigs. But I did play in Memphis with my mother-in-law, Linda Gale Lewis, and and they put it's a big place too, and but the tables are all 6 feet apart. And afterwards, people not only wanted to buy merch from her, they wanted to get autographs and take pictures with her and stuff. And so all she did was refuse to take her mask off. So all the pictures that people took that night, she has her mask on. And this is in Tennessee, and there was a lot more lax than what it is here. So,
Mm.
and I remember after that, I mean, and same with the bass player, they're all Memphis bands. We used Jerry Lee's back rhythm section, but
Wow.
they, I remember they said they went home, and for 2 weeks they were nervous as could be, like, because the people there they were like in your face, and we had our masks on, but a lot of people they refused to wear masks, and they refused to respect the fact that all the tables are 6 feet apart. And they're good people. They mean well. I mean, and no
Sure.
one got, as it turned out, no one, whether my mother-in-law, who's actually in her 70s, and no one got sick from that. So that, thankfully, it wasn't a super spreader event. But I remember we were really nervous for like 2 weeks. When we came back to Austin, we laid low and just hoped that everything was okay. It was. So.
Yeah, Tennessee, man, they still. Well, you probably know it better than I do, but Tennessee, I know when I'm on tour, that's one of the places that there's still smoke in those bars, and you don't get that as much anymore. What are in your travels? What are the places that still have plenty of smoking in the bars and stuff? Because I know Tennessee does.
Well, Florida does, and
Mm-hmm.
there's a couple. And I think the Florida does. I think Las Vegas doesn't it? Nevada.
I don't know.
Sure.
I've been in the last time I was there was a couple years ago. Yeah, they definitely allow it in the
And I
casinos and
think there's
stuff.
some counties in I mean, I don't. I seems like when I was
Probably.
down I played a gig down in New Braunfels. It seemed to me like in this bar that there was some smoking going on, but maybe it wasn't. But maybe I'm completely wrong. But I think they allowed smoking down there. What's that, Bastrop County, where the county where New Braunfels
Yeah,
is?
I
But
can't remember if they do it. There's got to be places in Texas that still allow it too, for
yeah,
sure.
but I know Florida's a big thing. Florida's like this. Why you go back? It's like going back into the 80s, like when
Right.
you think, well, how did I survive that? Like, you
I
remember
know.
these packed clubs where 50% of people were holding cigarettes in their hand while
Yeah.
you're playing,
Right.
and while you're, and it says you get. And I smoked back in the 80s, but then when I stopped, I still like hung out in smoky bars. But now
Right.
wow, what a difference! Like, how do we survive?
I know. It's such a huge difference. You can't even imagine what it was like with planes and everything. Well, where are you from originally, Danny? Where do you come from? And kind of, can you give us a little bit of backstory on when you started playing music, what kind of music was really catching your ear at young ages, and who became your idols and all that stuff?
Well, I was born in Killeen, Texas, because I was an Army brat. My dad was stationed at Fort Hood, so I lived in Copper's Cove till I was like 5, just 5 or 6. I never got a direct answer when they left, just the year they left. So either 5 or 6. But then we moved to. I lived in Delaware briefly, and then my mom got divorced, and my stepdad was in the Army too. So then we moved. Then I spent a lot of time growing up in Kentucky, then 1 year in Northern California, then Kentucky again. Then I went to high school in Southern California, a rural town, a town called Canyon Country, but it was 45 minutes from Hollywood. So, and that's kind of, and I started playing guitar when I was in Kentucky, but by the time we got to Southern California, by then I was a good guitar player. So I was able to get into local bands up in Canyon Country, which is a small town, but I was able to go out and play in Hollywood, and I was able to go out and see bands play. And basically, I was into hard rock. It's all guitar. I liked Jeff Beck. I liked Jimi Hendrix. I liked, Billy Gibbons. I liked all the blues, bass, kind of hard rock guitars. And from that, I got into jazz, and just it's all guitar oriented. But then I discovered rockabilly, and I realized that, wow, rockabilly is the music that you can play jazz. You can play jazz licks in it. You can play country licks in it. You can play blues licks. You can play rock and roll licks. And so I go, this is a music. That's why I got into rock, because I could, everything I had learned from jazz and country and all, I could play it in the genre of rockabilly. Whereas if I was playing blues, I couldn't really get too jazzy, and if I was playing rock and roll or hard rock, I couldn't get jazzy at all. And I definitely couldn't do country. So it's cool to me. And I still look at that rockabilly because it's just really diverse from a guitar player's point of view. There's a lot of different styles, you know what I mean?
Yeah, it really is. And I don't know why I never put two and two together, because I've heard plenty of rockabilly in my days. But yeah, it is, because the bass and drums are pretty simple. I mean, you can drive it, hard, and you can play fast, and
right.
But it is pretty simple. But the guitar, yeah, you're right. I mean, there's a lot of jazz licks in there. It's obviously hard, it's hard driving. So that's really interesting, and that's cool.
Yeah, well, because it came from like a lot. Because when it came together, it's just like, it was like hillbillies being influenced by blues and R&B. So
Hmm.
some of them leaned more toward the Western swing stuff, so it's more jazzy. Others leaned toward more of the country stuff, so it was more country. And some of the people didn't. They were just like hillbillies that listened to R&B radio, so they were like really blues based. But and
Mm.
so and so that yeah, so all the records and all the different everyone has, and a lot of it even sound, a lot of it like even predated surf with all when they were using all the delay and the reverb. So there's a
Right.
lot of surf guitar can fit in rockabilly as well. No one thinks it's out of character. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. So what year do, or not what year, but how old were you when you started playing guitar? And then how
I
old were
started,
you when you were like in Los Angeles starting to play around?
well, I was like I started playing at 13 when we were in Kentucky, and I was
Okay.
in it's a town called Catlettsburg, Kentucky, which is outside of Ashland, which itself is a small city, but Catlettsburg only had like 1,000 people. So by at 13, I got good really fast because I practiced and I just had a knack for it. So by the time I was 14, I was playing with everyone in town, I was playing with the 40-year-old guys, and there's no clubs there. It was a dry county on top of that, but church
Hmm.
events, and they'd have things the city would have, like little street fairs. And so I was playing with everyone. I was playing guitar with the 40-year-old guys that were singing country. I was playing in all the friends I knew in high school, and we were playing our rock band. So I was in that little town. I was really good. I was like a little virtuoso, a prodigy at 14. So then when I went to California, I carried that attitude, but I found out there's millions of people in California, and there's lots of good guitarists. But at least I was confident, so I was able to right away start getting into bands. And I kind of became professional when I was like 16. That's when I really started
Wow.
making money and playing live gigs. I played the Palomino, the world famous Palomino, when I was 16,
Wow.
and with the Elvis impersonator. And then I actually got to be in a house band briefly, and I got to back up Johnny Paycheck when I was 17. And
Wow.
so and that was in 1978. So, and from that just led to me getting into rockabilly, then meeting Levi and moving to London when I was 19. So
Before we get into jump into all that stuff, who were the early guys like when you started playing? Because it sounds like you were a quick learner and that you became very good very fast. So who were you kind of modeling yourself after in those very early years?
when I first started playing, the first song I learned on the guitar was Purple Haze. And because I
Nice.
went there, and the reason I learned it, my parents had bought me an acoustic guitar. I learned a couple chords, and I'm left-handed, so I had an acoustic guitar strung left-handed. So, and I think I could play Kumbaya or something. But I really couldn't play. But my next door neighbor, who was older than me, he had some SGs, and he could play all of Led Zeppelin. He could play all of Jimi Hendrix, and so I told him to show me Purple Haze. But he had right-hand guitars, so he showed me right-handed and let me borrow one of his guitars. And I went home and I learned it like in 2 days. And I went back and I could play the intro and the chords. And so he started showing me all that Zeppelin stuff. So that's kind of the first stuff I did. Then I got my own guitar, and then I just started learning. I said Steppenwolf, and I didn't have a lot of albums. I had Steppenwolf. I had the Black Sabbath, Masters of Reality album. So I learned all those songs, and that's kind of what I learned when I was in Kentucky. But then I had to play country music when I was playing with the older guys in town. So I learned enough. And my stepdad used to always play Chet Atkins. Had these reel-to-reel tapes of Chet Atkins. So that was always, even though I didn't play like Chet Atkins then, it was always in the back of my mind, and I always knew he was a good guitarist. And until someday I learned to play like him. But I learned some of his songs. I never learned to play like him. He was too good. But
Well, that sounds a lot like my early days too. I got picked it up because of Hendrix, and yeah, those early years it was a lot of Sabbath and Hendrix and
yeah,
Zeppelin for sure. So you said when you were 19, you moved to London, and how
yeah.
long were you overseas as a resident, or were you just like touring over there for a while?
Well, I joined Levi Dexter's band, and that was we started a band. He was in Levi and the Rockcats, which is an English band, and they broke. I mean, on December day, 1979, I went down to see him at the Starwood, and Smutty and Dibbs, who were the bass player and the singer in the Rockcats, Levi and the Rockcats. They told me, I saw them outside. They said, we quit the band today. We fired Levi today, and we're gonna keep the Rockcats, but we're gonna call it the Rockcats, and Dibbs is gonna sing, and would you be our guitar player? And I said, and then they were based in New York. I said, yeah, I'd love that. Then I went into the club, and I saw Levi and Lee Childers, manager, and Levi said, I quit the Rockcats today. I want to start a new band and move to London. Do you want to go with me? So that's why I said, yeah, I want to go to London. So that's kind of how that all worked out. And we put a band together. And the first band we had, Brian Setzer was the other guitarist. And we got his brother Gary Setzer in the band. And so for 3 months, they flew Brian out from New York. Him and his brother had a band called the Bloodless Pharaohs. And Brian also had the Tomcats, which is a side project, but his Bloodless Pharaohs is his main band. And they flew them out. We rehearsed for about a month. And they were supposed to go to London with us. But what happened is Brian wisely, when he got back to New York, he called Levi and said, I think I'm going to stick around and do my own thing. Because he had asked Levi if he could sing any songs in the band. And Levi said, you can sing one. And so Brian wisely made the choice to like just stay on his own path. And 3 months later, when we were living in London, Brian showed up with the Tomcats.
Wow.
And then the rest is history, because they changed the name to Stray Cats and everything is. So I've known Brian since I was 19.
Wow. Is he about the same age? Was he about 19 at the age, or is he a little older?
I think he might be a year older than me or 2 years older than me. We're all pretty close to the same age. So, and his brother's younger. So his brother was like probably 18, Gary Setzer. And Gary Setzer played drums standing up too. Like he was in, so when we did these rehearsals, he's the first drummer I played with standing up, And apparently my understanding is he didn't want to go to London. He wanted to stay in New York and do the Bloodless Pharaohs, and Brian wanted to go to London with the Tomcats. So Gary wouldn't go, so he took Slim Jim, and the rest is history. Slim Jim, but that combination was better. Slim Jim's a much better drummer than, as I remember it, when I was that he was better than Gary. Then maybe he wasn't, and I just didn't perceive it right. But I remembered Slim Jim being a better drummer. So.
And how long were you over there for?
Well, the first time with Levi, I was there for like about 2 years. And then his old band, the Rock Cats, they got signed to Island, and they convinced me to leave Levi and join them. So then I joined the Rock Cats, Levi's old band, and I moved to New York. And we got dropped from Island, but then we got signed by RCA. So it all worked out. So then I was in New York for a while. But I've gone back to London. In '86, I joined a band. Bernie Rhodes, who used to manage the Clash, he put a new band. He was managing a band called 20 Flight Rockers. And I had met him because we opened for the Clash, the Rock Cats. And he told the singer that is an Englishman, he told him like, oh, you should get this guitarist I met to play with the Rock Cats. They used to open for the Clash. So they flew me to London. I joined this band, 20 Flight Rockers. And I lived there for another year. And we got signed to Epic. So then we moved to LA. So we did the record in LA. Then that band broke up. And then I moved back to London and joined a band called the Wild Frontiers that were signed to Virgin Records. So yes, I lived in London 3 times. And
how do you like it over there? Was that first time you were over there? You're pretty young. Was it kind of the punk scene going on over there at that time?
Oh yeah. Like the first, and Lee Childers had managed our manager. He managed the Heartbreakers, Johnny Thunder's the Heartbreakers. So The day we arrived, right away, I met Susie, and I met all the punk. I met this new album with Rat Scabies. Me and Rat met back in 1980, but I haven't seen him. I reminded him we met back in 1980. We used to hang out at Dingwalls and the Electric Circus. We used to hang out at the same bars and stuff. And because of Lee, everyone knew Lee because the Heartbreakers had toured with the Sex Pistols, and they toured with the Damned, and they toured with all those bands. So everyone knew. So I got to meet all those punk rockers right away. Like as soon as I got there, I got Glenn Matlock. I got to meet 2 days after being there, and Steve Jones. Yes, it's kind of cool. The punk rock scene. The punk rock scene had changed. In 1980, was starting to change. But there's also, I was really good friends with Chaz and Suggs, who had the band called Madness, and Madness was just taking off. And so the ska scene was big. There's the Specials and Madness, and we lived in Islington, and right around the corner from Chaz and Suggs. So we hung out with them literally every day. We go drinking with them at the Hope and Anchor, a pub in Islington. Yeah,
so you mostly, every time you were over there, was it always in London, or were you in other cities as well?
Pretty much, I only ever lived in London. I mean, but different London's, but all over different area. I lived in Earl's Court. I lived in Holland Park. I lived out in Alperton, which is a real far suburb. I lived in trying to think of all the places I lived. I lived in a lot of different, because we move around a lot, and so the bed and breakfasts and stuff. So, and yeah.
And how did you like living over there? Those 3 times you lived there?
Well, it's great. It
fit into your sensibility as a rocker, and yeah.
I mean, it was a great music scene. London was really good. And then when I moved to New York in end of 1981, the music scene in the early 80s in New York was amazing. And the music scene in LA too. Every time I went to LA, there was a great scene. It's unfortunate we don't seem to have that scene anymore like we used to. Back then, it was so, I mean, I think, but then when I was in the Rock Cats and living in New York, our minimum was $2,000 a night, and we weren't even signed yet. And we made that, and we played 200 shows a year. I mean, music was, maybe it's because there's a lot of more young people. I don't know. Or there's a lot more clubs, and there was always lines around every single club. There's a line to get into, and it was just a great time. And
yeah, man, I'm sure you lived through probably a dozen different great scenes and times. I've talked about this before with other people. I really think the whole idea of scenes is dead. I don't think it's coming back. Unfortunately, It really sucks. But if you look around the country, where could there potentially be a scene? I mean, Austin has been a scene before. It's certainly not. I wouldn't call it a scene now. It's still a good music town, but we have our problems. But everything's online. People, it's not the same thing. I don't think you're going to see scenes very much anymore. Hopefully I'm wrong.
No, because you need a couple things. You need to have low rent. That's the one thing. Because when I lived in New York in the 80s, I mean, we were living in the worst sections of Manhattan, but every band lived in Manhattan. They lived in the Lower East Side. They lived down. They could live. I mean, a lot of people could still live like off Bleecker Street and stuff down in the Village, and so people could live in the city. So you kind of need the scene where you have low rents. And it's affordable for musicians, and then you need a lot of those clubs. And when you're forced to move out farther, you move out, that the scene kind of, and it's because where I used to live, every building I lived in New York, there's like musicians up and down in every apartment building, musicians from all these other bands, and you're all playing. So you walk down the street and you see all the other bands playing. So you run in, and even though London was spread out, there was still like, it seemed like in certain areas the musicians would congregate. Like a lot of people were in Chelsea, a lot of people were, but you'd see each other in club. Everyone went out every night. The whole thing of living is, in London, you go to the pubs, you go to the clubs, but New York was cool. I mean, you'd run into people on the street. You'd walk out on the street and you'd see like 5 or 6 other bands that are playing that night. I mean, and there's clubs across the street from clubs.
Yeah, man. It's definitely not. Yeah, we'll see. Maybe some of this economic shifting and cities falling through the gaps. Maybe there will be scenes again. But so why don't you tell us a little bit about New York? I know in the 80s. How long did you live there in the 80s? I know it was a good time to be there. Music was thriving, and like you said, it was there was that romantic version of dangerous New York, but affordable New York, and lots of artists. So how long did you live there? What kinds of people did you able to cross paths with?
I lived there from like 81 to 91. So
wow.
And in between there, I spent like a year. I spent a couple of years in London 2 times. I spent almost a year in LA, even though I still based in New York because I had to go out and do an album. We did this album that took forever, like in LA. And then I actually lived in Holland for 6 months too. So, but for the most part, my home base was New York. It was there's a lot of great music. I mean, I met everyone from the New York scene at one point or another. I got to know them all. Because I've been in there, and the Rock Cats were quite big at the time. So, and that's all the connections I made in London and in New York. That's what I still do to this day. Like when I started the band Lemmy Headcat, I met Lemmy in 1980 at Dingwalls in London. And he told me, he said, so I went up and he said, "Oh, I'm a big Rockway fan. I'm here to see you." And he started going to all our gigs. And so in New York, we always hang out at the Scrap Bar, and Lemmy would always be at the Scrap Bar. So I'd always run into Lemmy all the time. Then when I came to LA, we'd all hang out at the Rainbow, and that's where Lemmy hung out at the Rainbow. So, but just like, so a lot of the people I met, and I met in New York, I met pretty much everyone from the old school punk scene. I've done like 4 albums. Me and Clint Burke from Blondie he's been my best friend since 1982.
Wow.
We did like 5 albums together. We did that. The last recordings of Johnny Ramone, we did those with him because I knew Johnny and I knew Joey. I knew Dee Dee too. But the only one I ever worked with in the studio was Johnny. I played a lot of gigs with us in Holly and the Italians, so we opened a lot for the Ramones, and Rock Cats opened for the Ramones. And so, yeah, so I know a
Wow.
lot of those people. So
81 to 91, it was you're living pretty good there. You're living the
yeah,
life you wanted to live, huh?
and everyone lived there. I mean, then as it got more expensive. Obviously, like I knew Madonna before she became famous. Madonna was playing around, and she was like in the music building. But then some people became quite famous, and they stayed in New York. But eventually, people started moving to Brooklyn, and Hoboken was a big place to move to then. But me and Clem moved to L.A. at the same time, and so a lot of people from New York. I remember Arthur Kane moved to L.A. A lot of people from the New York scene start moving to LA because LA was still affordable then, and New York was becoming more and more affordable. So it was either move out to Brooklyn or move. And at the time, I decided to move to Hollywood and not move to Brooklyn, which I probably shouldn't. In retrospect, I should have moved to Brooklyn. But
Really? Well, let's talk about. We can kind of touch back on that in a sec. But so, like around 91 is when you moved to Los Angeles.
yeah, I moved because I moved to LA. My first gig in New York was December 14th, 1981 with the Rock Cats at the old Peppermint Lounge. And then my second show was New Year's Eve at the Peppermint Lounge. But then my last show in New York was at the new Peppermint Lounge, but in 1991. So.
And then how long were you out in LA for? How long was that your stomping ground for?
Till 10 years ago. So.
Wow.
So that's until for a long time. So 25 years, 90.
Wow.
No, is that right? Till 2010. No, I guess it's a little bit shy of 20 years. Sorry.
Yeah, 20 years. And how did you like LA? I mean, if you're staying there that long, you must have had a good time out there as well.
Oh, LA was great. I mean, because when we got to LA, that's when, and everyone, like I said, Lemmy was living there. Clem was, so right away, me and Clem started a band, and I started making a lot of records. And I didn't play as live as much, but when I did play live, it was tours. But we started the band. Me and Slim Jim started a band with the singer from the Polecats, and so we started playing a lot of shows. And I was just doing a lot of session stuff. I did a lot of soundtracks too. I did a soundtrack for the movie The Rage Carry 2 for MGM, which is number one at the box office. Like for
wow.
And it was a sequel. Yeah, it was a sequel to Carrie. Not a good movie, but I did the score for it. Like, so I did about 5 films. So I got to do film stuff, and I wrote a theme song for a Fox TV show. I got to do a lot of studio work with different bands. And that's then, like, in 1999, we started Headcat. Lemmy, me, and Slim Jim started Headcat. And that kind of became my main band after that.
Cool. I just want to kind of round out your journey, and then I want to come back to just some of the people you've gotten an opportunity to work with and the projects that you've had.
Okay.
But so you did LA for 20 years, and then 10 years ago you moved to Austin. Is that right?
Yeah.
And what brought you to Austin?
I was coming here a lot. Like, and my brother was still living. I didn't have any relatives left here. My aunt had been living in Houston, so I'd visit her when I was in Texas. My brother works in film a lot, so he moved here because he's working a lot in the film business. So he had a place here, and I started playing in a duo called the Lonesome Spurs with this girl Linda Kay, and she was from Austin, and she still kept an apartment in Austin, even though she's living in LA. So it was easy when we started playing to go get gigs in Austin because I could stay at my brother's place, and he had a place right downtown, and she had an apartment close to downtown. So we started coming here a lot about 2006, and we started spending like 4 months a year in Austin. And so I just fell in love in Austin. Like, I hadn't been there I hadn't played there since the early 90s, and I hadn't really played a lot since the 80s. It was supposed to come out in the 80s, but I just fell in love with the city. And then I go back to LA, and each time I go to LA, it's more depressing. It was becoming more crowded, more expensive. And I go back to Austin. I had so many friends here, and so I knew so many people that had moved to Austin and so many people that were from Austin. And I was living there 4 months out of the year. So I just decided that instead of just staying at my brother's house, I'd get my own apartment. And I figured playing with Lemmy, I could live anywhere because I could fly. We'd make enough money that I could fly in for any gigs we had to do. I didn't need to be close by anymore. So that's it. So it's 2009, February 2009, I moved here. So.
And so it's my wife and my family and I, we were actually planning to move to Los Angeles, and that was in June. So
yeah,
we postponed that 6 months because of obvious reasons, the Corona thing.
Right.
And now we've postponed it a year. And now, to be honest with you, I don't know if we're going to make that. We'll see. It's kind of much more up in the air. We had planned it. It was all ready to go. and now all this stuff's happened, and we're fine with it. But that was our plan. But it sounds like you were, if that was happening about 10 years ago. So would you say like 12 years ago, LA was not as, it's been within the last 10, 15 years where it's really started to get overcrowded and really expensive? Before that, it was more affordable, less crowded?
Well, remember I was married, and I had a ranch up in Aqua Dulce. So I had a 5-acre ranch with horses with my ex-wife. And so I'd drive into Hollywood all the time. And there was the scene that was happening then, like starting like in the 90s. There used to be a club called the Lava Lounge, and I played there every Tuesday. It's a real trendy, really popular place. I played there every Tuesday with my old friend who used to be in 20 Flight Rockers, who's English, and he's the manager there. So I played it. And then there's a scene. It was like a lot of rockabilly happening, a lot of like rootsy type music. So I was involved in like a lot of music. And we did, like I said, we did 13 Cats, which was the singer from the Polecats, Slim Jim from the Stray Cats, and me and Smutty were from the Rock Cats. And that band did really well. So we were able to, so that scene was really happening. So I just got more and more tired of living way up on a horse ranch, 45 minutes outside of LA. So, and then when my marriage fell apart, I moved right back to Hollywood, and I moved right down to Echo Park. And at the time, Echo Park was still kind of rough because, Silver Lake had become really expensive, and Echo Park's right next to Silver Lake. But Silver Lake, all those places in LA, when a neighborhood they start to redo it. They start to rebuild all the old houses, and it becomes quite expensive, and the restaurants jump up in price. And so that was like where I was living in Echo Park. I said, wow, I could rent an apartment. I could rent a 2-bedroom house in Austin for the same price I was paying to live in a room in a big house in LA. Because I was living like 4 other people in this 6-bedroom house, but in Echo Park. But like I could have my own house in Austin. And at the time, traffic in Austin wasn't bad at all. It's changed a lot too.
Yeah, it has. It certainly has. So, I just want to kind of tap into some of your experiences in the little time we have left here. But you had mentioned, I'll get to some of the, obviously the one big guy you work with. I want to talk to you a little bit about. But you mentioned a few minutes ago you work with Johnny Paycheck. Were you just a backing band, or were you actually doing regular things? Because I know he was quite a character.
I was in. He probably influenced my life as much as anyone rocker I worked with. But no, I was playing. See, the Palomino had a house band, and I wasn't in the house band, but the guitarist took a vacation. He asked me if I would sub for him. It meant that on Tuesday nights they'd have these singing contests, or like I guess there's open mic type thing. And then some bands, some touring bands, especially the old school guys, they would tour without a band. They usually tour with like a musical, because they would tour because they could make more money, and a lot of their songs are easy, but they would tour. So Johnny Paycheck, I just happened to be subbing. Johnny Paycheck came in, and he had a musical director. He had a piano player as a musical director, and we rehearsed with him to learn his set, and we played it, but I have to back him up. But what I remember is why we were in the Palomino rehearsing, and there's a little door off the side of the stage in the parking lot. Johnny Paycheck pulled up, and he had a white limo. And this is like 1978. And I think it's 78. Possibly it's early 79, but I think it was pretty sure 78. And he's in the car talking on the phone, which is, in that time no one had. He's talking on the phone in the car. He had these 2 like 6-foot tall girls with blonde hair and the mini skirts sitting with, and he sat there in this white limo while we did all the rehearsal. Then his musical director went out and got him and someone to come in and go through one song, check it out. So he walked in. I remember he walked in the Palomino, and with his arm around the 2 girls' waist. And Johnny Paycheck's a short guy, and he had a big old hat. But even that, the girls were like 2 feet taller than him, and they were like really gorgeous girls. He had his arms around them, and he went up the bar. I remember Tommy was there, so Tommy gave him a shot of whiskey. So, and then he came, okay, boys, let's do this. And I went, wow, man, as a 17-year-old, wow, look at those girls, a limo, girls, and so to me, it really influenced me. Like, it was like as rock and roll as anything I'd ever seen, because these weren't like country girls. They were like, these were like he got them right down off of Hollywood Boulevard.
So that specifically, that story is what influenced you so much, or was there other stuff as well? Just the presence and the rock and roll.
Yeah, and I did the music. I mean, and I didn't talk to him that much. He didn't hang out with us at all. He was really distant from us. He was in the dressing room. We weren't allowed to be in the dressing room. We did this, his musical director was. He had a lot of friends in there. He came up, we did the show. He acknowledged us on stage. It wasn't like the kind of thing we introduced. He didn't know our names or anything.
Mm-hmm.
We backed him up. He did a good show, and it was a short set, really. Then that's it. So I didn't really get to hang out with him. Plus, I couldn't drink anyhow. And the Palomino, a lot of clubs in LA back in those days, they let in underage people. They used to put, instead of like nowadays they card you and sometimes they stamp you, they do the opposite. There's so many underage people, like the Whiskey, the Starwood, the Palomino. They take a marker and they put a big X on both your hands if you're underage, because it's easier to tell who's underage than who's overage. So that's it. They put these big black things on your hands. You have these two black X's.
Sure. So the Johnny Paycheck influence was just his
was his image,
presence. Oh, that's so cool.
Wow, there's a guy in a white limo. I've never seen any show. I only play like a handful of shows, but I'd never seen that in a bar. Like I played there enough. I played it like 5 or 6 times before. I never saw a musician pull up in a limo and have girls with him, all this hanging out with him in the bar. Like, you know what I mean? And on a telephone, like telephones in the cars were unheard of. You know what I mean? That was like something for the wealthy. Of course, a year later he was bankrupt, and when he passed away, Chris Christopherson had to pay for his funeral because he Johnny Paycheck just kind of lived it. Like he struggled a lot. When he had money, he spent it. You know what I mean? And he spent it on the things he liked, women and luxuries. And then he was broke again. Instead of saving it and investing it, he seemed to be, he just enjoyed it. You know what I mean?
That generation of country stars was, they're their own breed for sure. I don't know if you've ever seen is it Showtime or Cinemax, but the Mike Judge, who's an Austin guy too. He the Tales from the Tour Bus. I don't know if you've seen that, but there's one on Johnny Paycheck that's pretty amazing.
Mike's a friend of mine, and I told him when he told me he was doing it, 'cause the first one they would filming was Johnny Paycheck. That was like the first, and I told him, like, I played, but my story wasn't as, you've seen it. They have great stories. Then my mother-in-law, my mother-in-law did the Jerry Lee. My mother-in-law is a lot in the Jerry Lee one.
Oh, and
And it just so happened when the Jerry Lee one, they aired it on Jerry Lee's birthday, and they were playing with Jerry Lee for his 80th birthday in New York City. So I remember we came back to the hotel room, me and Linda Gale and my wife Annie, and we watched it. So I texted Mike. I go, I just watched it with Linda Gale. Like, she really likes it, you know what I mean? And so Mike's, and he texted back, it's so good to know, because he always worries about what people think. But now Jerry Lee didn't watch it, but the day before, my mother-in-law was up in the hotel room with Jerry Lee, and they were watching HBO, or is it HBO, right? Or Cinemax, whatever came on.
I think it's Cinemax,
And the ad came on with the one which shows Jerry shooting up all the teeth and stuff. And he started laughing. So I told Mike, I go, I don't know if Jerry Lee saw it, but they were watching the promo for it. And he started laughing when he saw the clip of him shooting up all the teeth, shooting the gun and the teeth being shot. And then Mike goes, oh, that's so cool. So the killer liked it.
The killer. So while we're on the subject, how did you meet your wife, who is the granddaughter of Jerry Lee Lewis, correct?
Oh, she's the niece of Jerry Lee.
The niece. How did you guys meet? And did you know who she was beforehand, or was it just a serendipitous kind of thing? And
no, the way it worked is Headcat, for Jerry Lee's 70th birthday, Headcat opened for Jerry Lee. So, and I got to know his daughter Phoebe. At the time, Phoebe was managing him. Phoebe's his oldest child. She was Myra and Jerry's daughter. So she was managing at the time, and so we kind of became friendly. And she actually introduced me and Lemmy and Slim Jim to Jerry Lee that night. There's pictures of us, and there's actually a picture in the Jerry Lee Lewis Museum of me and Lemmy and Slim Jim and Jerry Lee. Wow. But so for about 6 months later, I'm in Vegas, and Jerry Lee's playing at the Viva Las Vegas. So I texted Phoebe, and I said, "Is there any way I can get in to see your daddy?" And she said, "Oh yeah, you meet JW." That was his road manager, his long-term road. So I went and met JW at the side of the stage, and he gave me a wristband and got me in. And he put me on the side of the stage, because you can stand on the side of the stage, and there's a big festival. You can stand on. So Annie and Linda Gale, they always open Jerry Lee's show. Linda Gale plays piano, and Annie comes out and sings. So they freak him out, and there's this beautiful blonde singing at the front of the stage, and so I texted Phoebe. I go, "Who is that girl opening for your daddy?" And she wrote back, "That's my skinny cousin. Do you want to meet her?" And so then she told Annie, "Do you want to meet my friend Danny? He's really cool. He's really talented." And so we got in touch, but it took us 2 years to finally have it meet up and have a date, because she was on the road all the time with her mother and with Jerry Lee, and I was always on the road with my band. So, but it literally took us 2 years to have our first date. So,
And how long have you guys been together for?
Now we've been together since 2014. So in March will be our 6th anniversary. So I guess we've been together just about 6 years. So July 2020.
Very cool.
2014.
It's the same year I got married, so it's a good year for both of us, I guess.
Yeah.
So I want to kind of tap in also to other people you've worked with, but obviously Lemmy is a huge character and somebody who's just a big icon. And to you, he's not probably an icon. He's your friend, and he's your bandmate, and he's your buddy. So I'm interested to just know any bits about, what your relationship was with Lemmy, maybe something that you got to, well, you probably experienced a lot of things most of us don't get to experience, especially with Lemmy, but what was he to you? What did you glean from him, or what was the best part of him as a friend and a coworker?
Like I said, I knew him all over. So I met him like at Dingwalls in 1980, and he used to come to all our shows. So we were always friendly. I would never say we were close friends, but whenever I saw him, he'd always say, "Hey, Dan." He's one of the 2 people I worked with that never called me Danny. He'd call me Dan. So, "Hey, Dan." So then in the late 90s, me and Slim Jim were doing a tribute to Elvis. We decided to get all our buddies on it. So we thought would be cool is get Johnny Ramone and Lemmy on the same track. And so I went in, we cut it with Johnny Ramone and without Lemmy's vocal. We did Viva Las Vegas and Good Rockin' Night. So we brought Lemmy in to sing, and Lemmy sang Good Rockin' Night. Then he heard Viva Las Vegas. He goes like, "Dan, I can't sing this. It's the wrong key." And I said, and I'd picked a key because I talked to Johnny. I said, "What key do you want to do it in?" And he said, "Let's keep the original key." So Lemmy goes, "I can't sing this. It's the wrong key." So he goes, "Danny, you pick up the bass," and let me pick up an acoustic, and told Jim to get on the drums, and we cut 2 songs. And then Lemmy said, "This should be a band. The 3 of us should be a band." So we started a band, and that's kind of how. And also, I always looked at like Head Cat was Lemmy's fun. We were 3 friends, and it was like his fun friend band. Whereas Motorhead's obviously his legacy and his mega band, and that was like, never.
Head Cat's like his vacation home or something.
Yeah. So it's like whenever Motorhead wasn't touring, because Lemmy liked to play, he was never the kind of guy to go on holiday or take a vacation. So whenever Motorhead would be off the road, Lemmy would book shows like with Head Cat. And so that when he was, but it's a whole different dynamic because like I would drive Lemmy to the gigs in my Honda Civic, you know what I mean? And I remember like playing a show we played once, and they had a dressing room for Lemmy and a dressing room for us. And Steve, the road manager, goes, no, Head Cat, they all share this because Lemmy likes sharing the dress. Like with Motorhead, they have these big backstage at Mickey and Phil in one and Lemmy in another, because they had a lot of press and a lot of, so Lemmy always went to share the same dressing room, to hang out. Like it's like, I guess it's like sort of like the way it used to be in the old days. We only had a couple tours. We had a tour bus, but usually we would go fly somewhere. We'd rent an SUV, and we'd all 4 drive. We had 1 road crew who was our road manager, and 4 of us would drive around the gigs. So, and it was like really low. I mean, for Lemmy, it was like really low, but he liked it that way. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I got to see how down to earth Lemmy was. Like he was one of the most down to earth people I met for being how famous he was. He was just down to earth. So.
That definitely comes across, and it sounds like the whole setup was pretty laid back. I mean, I've seen tons of different footage of Lemmy, and I think in those early Motorhead days, the speed was pretty pulsing through his system. And as he became older, you didn't quite see that kind of wide-eyed speed Lemmy anymore. But when you were playing with him, was he always kind of the same you see in the last 20, 30 years of his life? Footage is kind of laid back, easygoing guy. And
he was a laid back, but I mean, he still did speed. I mean, because
right,
Lemmy always.
I think you know what I mean. Like in those early years, he always had those bug eyes.
Yeah, but I think at that point, his lifestyle, his body had gotten used to it. I think, as a matter of fact, there was a rumor that when he had all his health problems, when I say rumor, it's not really a rumor. He said it, but out of his own. But he said the doctor told me that I shouldn't, whatever I'm doing, I should keep doing, just cut down a bit, because he told me not to stop the speed because he thinks my body might need it now.
Yeah, I could see that. It became a part of his normal
Well, the thing is, people
food.
that take Adderall, which is basically speed. If
Oh
it
yeah,
helps you, you get used to it. You kind of then you need it. You know what I mean? Not just you need it to function. And I think
right.
the speed probably Lemmy, after 40 years of doing speed, it probably became part of. He needed it. It wasn't so much getting high, and like you said in the early days, is more
Right.
about just being himself. You know what I mean? That's what
Definitely.
they. But the doctor told him not to
Definitely.
stop.
Yeah. So I want to get your, we can go on and on Lemmy, but I love Lemmy. Everyone loves Lemmy, and it sounds like you had a special thing with him. But is there one or two other people, in all those scenes you were in? I think you're really lucky, and you deserve what you got, because you're a rocker, and you try different places out, and you reap the rewards of it. But were there one or two or three people through those years in London, the years in New York, the years in LA, who kind of really stood out, either because of the performer they were, or the person they were, or the friendship you developed with them?
Well,
It's
like I
probably
said,
hard to
like
choose, to be honest.
like
But
well, Clem Burke's become like my best friend. He's like one of my best friends, and and we do everything together. And we ended up, and it's another thing, because one of the, as far as famous people I played with, the other famous person I played with, who was actually in a different way more famous than Lemmy, was Nancy Sinatra. So when I toured with Nancy Sinatra, it's like everywhere she's the only person that every person in the world knew she was. If I go through customs, they go, who you have my work permit, who you playing with? I go, I'm here with Nancy Sinatra. The customs people would start looking around going, is she here? Is she here? Everyone knew Nancy, and she was down to earth as Lemmy. The first gig I did with her was the Bumper Shoot Festival in Seattle. We'd rehearsed for like a week in LA. We flew up, and then and my itinerary says be in the lobby at 1:30 for the van. So I go down early like I always do. And she's sitting there. So I sat next to her in the lobby, and she's signing autographs. And then I asked her, I go, are you waiting for your car to take you? She's like, I'm in the van. Can I get in the van with you? And I go, so this is a 75-year-old lady. It's Nancy Sinatra, and she gets into the van and she goes in. So we toured all over the world, and I've eaten at McDonald's with her. I've been like, she's like the most down to earth person ever. You know what I mean? It's like just
that's
like
cool.
Lemmy. And she's also the only other person. She said, she was in my culture, Danny is considered like a boy's name. Is it all right with you if I call you Dan? And I'll call you Danny on stage. And so Lemmy and her were the only people that refused to call me Danny. They only call me Dan.
Interesting. Interesting. It's so cool how connected you are to these monolith figures. I mean,
Yeah.
you had to have the firsthand, really firsthand with Lemmy. I mean, he is, he's on one version of the whatchamacallit, the Faces in Stone, Mount Rushmore of metal. And then you're working with the daughter of easily one of the biggest stars of all time. And then you're marrying the niece of another, Mount Rushmore over here. So
now
you
Jerry
really,
Lee's my uncle now. So
yeah, that's just unbelievable. I mean, you really are connected to all these different root structures, and that's so cool.
It's funny when Phoebe introduced us to Jerry Lee, and there's a picture. We went up there, and Phoebe goes, she goes, Daddy, this is my friend Danny. This is Lemmy from Motorhead. This is Slim Jim from the Stray Cats. They opened for you. So I shook his hand, and Lemmy shook Jerry Lee's hand, and then Lemmy goes, it's the fucking Killer. And then Lemmy goes, it's the fucking Killer. Lemmy was like so excited to meet Jerry Lee.
Oh, that's so beautiful.
Yeah,
that's so beautiful.
Yeah. He was. I mean, this is 2011, so it's not like back. It's like when Lemmy was an established star. You know what I mean? But Lemmy was he was just so excited to meet. He kept saying, "It's the fucking Killer." That's all he kept saying.
I think that's so beautiful, because that is one of the most core things about rock and roll music. I'm sure you see it in other art forms, but there's something about the rock and roll artists that there's always that kid in you. You know what I mean? There's always that kid, and you can always tap into that, whether it was 12-year-old, 15-year-old, when you first saw Hendrix or you first saw Elvis, and it's like, that's always with you. And so when I hear that about Lemmy, I know Lemmy was a huge Little Richard fan too. So, like Jerry Lee and Little Richard are like, two peas in a pod. They had their own things, but they were that same blaring early rock and roll energy. So I just love hearing that. That's so cool.
Yeah,
So kind of rounding things out here, I'll wrap up with you. All right there.
yeah, no, the thing was starting to tilt down a bit. I saw my hat was disappearing, and I was trying to adjust. Okay, I think it's better now.
Cool.
Yeah. Okay,
So I just want to kind of tap into your how your experience meets this present situation, because this is unprecedented. All the things you've seen, which is a plethora of incredible rock and roll, everything. Now you're in a place where you've probably never been anything close to this, with this whole COVID situation. And how are you feeling about, your own career, but then also the music industry? Because this is totally new, and who knows, but what are you feeling with all this stuff?
Well, it's not just me. I mean, it's every musician, but it's also every like person that works in a bar or a restaurant, or people that own small businesses. It's like, and it's all over the world. It's like, this is like something, it's not just a region. It's like not just Americans that are suffering. It's like crazy that everyone's going through this. My friends in England that band, they have the same problems, you know what I mean? And this worry of people. It's just so funny the way our whole world is based. Everyone needs money to live, but people can't make, and it's not just musicians, people are having trouble making money, you know what I mean? And so I'm trying to do okay. I have residual checks from things that thankfully still come in, and I've been doing like some more albums, playing live. I'm just playing now for fun. I'm making hardly any money because all the festival, the whole way it works, you probably know, it's like you go play the festival and you have a nice little payday, and that will, that's my rent for 4 months. You know what I mean? Then you can go play the other things you can do for fun. But without those festivals, there's no like little guarantee of money coming in. Yeah, it's a really sad situation, but I mean, I'm doing okay. So I'm like, when I'm saying I'm doing okay. I'm not threatening, I'm not afraid of being evicted right now or not eating. But I worry for the people that are in a lot worse situation, that they might lose their houses, they might not have a place to live, and it's just a bad situation. I don't know. I obviously don't have a solution, but it's crazy.
Well, I think with the way you've kind of lived your career is you've diversified in so many different ways. You put out so many different pokers and so many different fires, and I think that's what anybody who's in a creative field has to do at any time, but now more than ever. We all have to be as clever as we can be. We have to find as many projects or side projects or whatever, because this side of the industry is going to get hacked off in 5 years, and then this whatever. So you just got to keep, it's like it's kind of always been this way anyways with musicians and artists. You have to keep evolving, or you die, so to speak, anyway. So now now we're really in the pressure cooker. But
up until the pandemic, I was good at that. I was always good at like ending up working on other projects that were, we're not number one albums, but I was able to generate a living. But now I'm just in its all thing, but you're right. But now it's hard because a lot of people, you kind of, even though there's not as much a scene like there used to be in the old days, you still kind of need that camaraderie, because a lot of the gigs you get is because you go out to see one band and you see your friends at the bar and they tell you, hey man, we got a gig. Can you play next Saturday? It kind of keeps you in their mind. And or people go, hey man, that's a band start. Bands seem to start because people meet each other hanging out in a bar watching another band that they both like or something. I mean, it's a lot of that, like socializing is kind of how you get a lot of your gigs, you know what I mean?
Right.
And nowadays, when you do see your friends out, and like when at the gigs I'm playing, you do see them, you have masks on, and you can't really go up and hug them and say, how you doing? You can't really, it's hard to talk to people, you know what I mean?
Yeah. As slow as some of the time goes, it's also gone strangely fast. So I don't know, man. Hopefully another 6, 8, 12 months, we'll be back to some kind of normalcy, but who knows? Well, Danny, I really appreciate it, man. It's been great talking to you. I really admire your career and what you do and what
thanks,
you bring
man.
to the table. So thank you for your time. I had a great adventure here.
So did I. I mean, I hate doing this. I hate talking about myself so much, but I know that you want to know the facts, but it's really, I'm really not that kind of person that likes to talk about the people I play with. I'd rather you listen to the people I play with, but I'm glad you liked it, but just so you know, I'm always uncomfortable. That's why I have my glasses so I can close them before I brag about myself.
Yeah, man, no worries. I know exactly what you're talking about, but you know what? We love hearing it, so don't feel bad about it. So
okay, man.
A lot of people will get a lot of it. But thank you very much. Have a good one, bud.
Thank you, man. You be safe. Take it easy. Thanks, Sam.
Okay, you too.
Bye.